Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Abby Ape. I'm the director of the Brickell Homeowners Association, and I am thankful that you are joining us this afternoon. I have my cup of coffee ready. It's almost empty, and there's a lot of great content coming our way. But before we begin and introduce our panelists to you, I'd like to kick the floor over to Mr. Ernesto Cuesta, the president of the Brickell Homeowners Association. Ernesto? You may be having some issues. Ernesto? Okay. Well, we will wait for him to be able to unmute. 1 second. Ernesto?
Hi, how are you? How you doing? Well, thank you to Will and to Robert, good professionals and acquaintances of the BHA. I think that this is a great seminar to start with because there is a lot of lack of information on this issue, and I think that the tsunami is coming to the condos. I think that we better get into it. So Robert and Will, thank you so much, and let's start.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Ruben Diaz is also here with the city of Miami. He is a fire chief, so he's joining us as well. But let's get started. At the core of the Brickell Homeowners Association, our mission lies in dedicated ensuring the well-being of our membership, over 40 condos here in the Brickell community. Our advocacy focuses on quality of life issues, such as the topic that we're going to present to you. I'd like to start off by introducing the City of Miami, our Fire Chief, Mr. Ruben Diaz, who's joining us here today. Hello, Mr. Diaz. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Abby. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Thank you. We also have shareholder of Siegfried and Rivera, Mr. Robert Blanch. Hi, Robert. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Abby. Thank you. And thank you, Ernesto, for the welcoming remarks.
Absolutely. We also have CEO of Digitech Wireless, Mr. Will Washburn.
Hi, Abby. Thanks. And Ernesto, thank you for the warm welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and we also have a few of our other friends from the Department of Fire and Rescue who are joining us here today to answer any of those technical questions that you may have. Thank you guys for being here. So before we get started, just want to let you know, we are going to start off with a presentation, go into the legal questions, also get an opportunity to hear from the City of Miami Fire Chief. And then at the very end, we're going to have the opportunity to answer your questions. So please go ahead and ask your questions using the chat icon below. It'll just allow us to be a little bit organized. If you think of a question, drop it in the chat. This is a very important topic in today's world when it comes to condo associations. BDA radios they're very vital in their role of enhancing the safety of condominium and our communities. And so here we are today, and we are going to get started with the City of Miami Fire Chief, Mr. Ruben Diaz. He has extensive experience in this department. And so we want to start off first with the big question, like, why is this important and why are we here today? So Mr. Diaz, are you able to share a little bit more about the functionality of BDA radios, as well as the challenges and obstacles that you have as a firefighter when it comes to emergencies in high-rise condos? I know it's a bit of a loaded question, but I know that you are able to answer that for us.
No problem, Abby. Thank you so much. So obviously every high-rise and every condo poses its own challenges, right? Whether it has to deal with BDAs or the life safety systems associated and our ability to respond and communicate through that building to safely either mitigate an incident or be able to safely communicate in order to rapidly assist any of our residents or visitors that come into our city. So the BDA is a complex system that obviously enhances the ability for us, all first responders, including our partners in PD, to be able to communicate throughout the building and out of the building to one another, to be able to effectively communicate as to locations or situations in which we're encountering, to be able to better and more rapidly execute on where we want to get to. So that system enhances our ability to ensure that we are able to communicate clearly to one another from the interior throughout the building, and then obviously importantly to the exterior of the building in the event of a situation or further assistance may be needed or additional resources to be able to then render aid or mitigate whatever situation we're encountering rapidly.
Yeah. Do you find that in Brickell or downtown where you have a lot of condominiums, it is difficult to communicate with your team? Like, has there been instances where you've tried to assist and have been faced with the challenge of not being able to properly communicate?
So what there are, you know, there's always pockets in different buildings that impact us. You know, these structures are developed so dense and so thick in the walls, and the glass themselves that they're being installed created a challenge for us to be able to communicate towards the outside. And without these systems properly functioning, we're not going to be able to do that effectively. Obviously, the pure height and the stature of these buildings pose another threat as well. So the taller the building, the thicker and the more dense the buildings are, the thicker the glass is, makes it a little bit more difficult to communicate. So there are times in which some of these systems, we were unaware that they weren't operating to the standard or to the level we expect. And then obviously we find out the hard way at times, right? Once we actually are there on an actual alarm or responding. And then of course there becomes a lot of follow-up that comes through our office in the Fire Prevention Bureau, and that we get the information gets relayed to from our first responders that actually go out there from our front line, from the operational side of the fire department. So there are times in which we will encounter them, but we always ensure that we follow up with them and deal with the building management and ownership in order to try to correct them, ensuring that we get the proper communication we need in there.
Yeah, most definitely. This is something that's so critical and essential for all of our first responders to be able to communicate with the people on the ground. And just with, I mean, I've been in a building before where the cell phone signal doesn't work. And so I can imagine that you amplify that when it comes to safety and emergency response. So thank you for answering that question, Mr. Diaz. We are going to move over to Mr. Will Washburn, who has a presentation for us to share, to just walk us through how this works and a little bit as to what they're already doing in Miami. So Will, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do we want to have Robert go over the statute and the requirements first? Robert, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, of course. You know, not a problem, Will. You know, I guess the critical aspect of this is for many of the existing buildings is that this requirement for the bi-directional amplifiers or the systems that would facilitate two-way communications with our first responders is that many of the properties that are 75 feet or higher may be required to install some of these systems. And of course, we can speak to Will and perhaps others to find out what, you know, that might mean by way of costs. But there are deadlines, there are timeframes, and this is required statutorily. So the Florida legislature has legislated because of the life safety implications involved that by January 1st of 2025, buildings that do not allow for the two-way communication, as Chief Diaz referenced earlier, will have to have systems installed within their buildings to allow for that type of communication. And of course, while we do have January 1st, 2025 as the deadline by which the systems must be made available, there is another deadline that is looming, and that is January 1st, 2024. By that deadline, if your building is such that you need to have this system because there is a failure, I guess, or an inability to have the two-way communication take place within your building, then by January 1st, 2024, there must be a permit application submitted to the authority having jurisdiction, which would provide for a successful system to be installed in your building. And then you'd have that 1-year period within which to install the system. And of course, Will can elaborate on the time that it might take to inspect buildings and design, and what designs may be required of different buildings given different issues. But that is the gist of what is required for many of the buildings that are 75 feet or higher and may need to comply with this requirement. Curiously enough, there are certain exceptions to this rule, and if the building is a wood frame building, you don't have to install the amplifiers, but I'm not really sure of how many buildings in the jurisdiction of the BHA are wood frame buildings that are considered to be high-rise buildings. So we'll keep that aspect of the wood frame building in our back pocket for the time being. Suffice it to say that if you are a wood frame or are residing or owning a wood frame building, then we can have another discussion. But for most of the properties or all of the properties of which we are aware in the Brickell corridor and in our urban core, we do recognize as a community, as a legal community that represents community associations within this area, that many of our clients will be confronted with the need to install these systems, and of course, and we can dive into this later on once Will has given us an explanation of what these systems are and what these systems do. We can talk about, the funding behind these and whether owners may or may not disagree with what's going to take place. But I'll pass it over to Will now to expand upon what I've stated.
Thank you, Robert. Excellent overview. I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to spend a few minutes only on a shameless plug of our company, but I want to establish that we are a national specialty contractor that focuses on ERCS systems, the BDA, as well as cellular systems. We have a strong presence in Miami. It's going to be probably our biggest market with these new mandates. We've had experience. We've gone through, this isn't our first rodeo. We've built the Southeast Financial. We put a cellular as well as a ERCS system in their BDA. We did the Epic Hotel. Same thing, IDAS solution with ERCS, 801 Brickell. We built that as well, and 701 Brickell. So I just kind of wanted to let you all know that we are a seasoned specialty contractor, and it's important to understand that not everybody does this. There are a lot of electrical contractors that don't actually specialize in this field, and we do a lot of integrations for them. So we have the acumen and the prowess to build these, especially in this region. We've got some experience. So with that said, let's talk about the basics of a BDA system. A BDA system is a bidirectional amplification system that gets a feed from the roof from a donor antenna, and through that donor antenna it goes down into the bidirectional amplifier. The signal gets amplified, and then it pushes it out through a distributed array of antennas. And that's actually the term that we should use going forward, because this is a DAS system, a distributed antenna system. And what it does is it allows for us to cover dead spots within the building that are caused by densities like concrete, lowy glass, for instance. I know a lot of the folks have retrofitted their building with these high impact double pane windows. And a lot of those are lowy glass, which is a energy efficient glass that actually blocks cellular and RF coverage because it's got a thin film of aluminum that helps take the heat and dissipate it and block out those specific waves. And RF signal is one of those waves. So because of these building densities like concrete, elevators have steel in them, and this lowy glass, there are quite a few areas, especially in the Brickell corridor, where the densities are high, and there's a lot of other structures that prohibit us from having clear signal within the building, and especially the emergency responders when they're in the critical areas like the elevators and the stairwells and pump rooms. So this bidirectional amplification system is part of a macro system that the city provides signal for their emergency responders and their fire personnel, as well as any other first responder that enters the building. But the macro donor site emits a signal, and we talked about the donor antenna on top of our buildings, and it goes down into the BDA and pushes out signal to the distributed antennas throughout the building. So when a firefighter is in the building and it keys up, it'll find the nearest antenna, and it'll go back through the BDA system, amplify it, and push it back out to the macro. And this allows connectivity for the people, the fire command center. It allows connectivity for people at dispatch. It allows connectivity for those who are in the building and responding to an emergency. Some of the radio frequency dynamics that are important to understand is radio waves emit from the macro tower and fall to the ground and get weaker over distance. And there are obstructions that impair coverage, like buildings in the way and distance, and this is known as path loss. So a signal may come out of the macro at plus 33 dBm or higher, and may be reduced to a negative number of neg 70 or 80. And I'm not going to get into the dynamics of what this means, but they are intended to provide coverage when we're in these buildings. And because of the densities, maybe that signal strength is reduced to maybe neg 95 or better, which also happens to be the national standard of what your building has to have as far as coverage in 95% of the common areas. And in this jurisdiction, 100% of the critical areas. So neg 95 is the threshold where we determine whether your building has dead spots that don't qualify for that signal strength and require remediation. So some of the impairments are complete structures, of course, building between the intended target and the macro. Steel, which is a high density impairment, lowy glass, which is almost equivalent to 18 inches of concrete. Concrete itself is a high impedance, and then wood framing and sheetrock, they're more on the medium and low. So when we get into the analysis of what exists in your building as far as coverage, these are all important factors. I got some pictures here to show you just to see what these look like. This here is a BDA, and this is another one. This is also a battery backup unit that is required to be put in place so that these run continuously for 24 hours. This is what a donor antenna looks like on the roof. And then maybe this would be a distribution antenna of sorts that we would put in the garages, because naturally they're the lowest part of the building in a lot of cases, and this is where coverage is challenged, okay? We talked about the low E glass, and you know, I've done a lot of signal surveys in this jurisdiction, probably about 60 or 70, and every building has different dynamics. Southeast Financial, for instance, was very hot at the perimeter, but all of its elevators failed, and that ended up being a elevator retrofit and stairwell retrofit. Whereas some other properties, when you get thick into the Brickell corridor, I get floors that are failing in the perimeters also because of the use of low E glass. And basically, you know, it blocks ultraviolet and infrared light that pass through the glass, separating the heat and the illumination components of sunlight and reflect it away. That gives it the LEED certified, shall we say, standard, which is more energy efficient. However, it blocks radio frequency because of the thin film of aluminum. So every building in that corridor has different dynamics. And I know there was a question and a discussion about what buildings need this and what's traditional. It's a mixed bag, especially in this Brickell corridor. This is a national initiative, originally initiated by National Fire Protection Agency as well as International Fire Code, but the authority having jurisdiction is usually the municipality. And in this case, Miami city standards are augmented a little bit from the national standards, and the minimum coverage you need in a property is neg 95 or better in 95% of the common areas in the floor coverage. Coverage in critical areas needs to be 100%. And we discussed this earlier, and those areas are stairwells, elevator, pump rooms, fire command centers, and things like that, where the emergency responders are going to be. And then there's another standard called digital audio quality, or I'm sorry, delivered audio quality. And that's a subjective, that's what your ear hears. And it's rated on a scale from 0 to 5. And we need to have 3.4 or better in this jurisdiction. So those are the standards for Miami City. Now, if you go out into the county, there's different frequencies to cover and there's different standards. Miami Beach has their own set of standards. Broward County has their own set of standards, but most of the individuals on this Zoom are probably from the Brickell corridor. That's all within the city of Miami, and the AHJ is Miami, is the fire department. Okay, we talked a little bit about passing and failing scores. Passing is neg 95 or better, which is counterintuitive because these are negative numbers. So as the numbers get lower, the strength of the signal improves. And then starting at neg 96 and up, you get into failing signal strength. And these are important to discuss because when we do a grid test, that's what we're using as our benchmark. And we're loading those benchmarks into our test gear to determine what percentage of your floor areas are covered and in the grid test, and what percentage of your critical areas are covered. Okay. We discussed us being a specialty contractor, but who is qualified to build these? Well, you must have an EC13 electrical license to integrate the system. So that's a must. And within that subset of that trade, there's specialty contractors like us that have RF engineering backgrounds and used to install and still do cellular systems because that's an RF system as well. The designers and engineers must be FCC GROW licensed. The lead installer must be FCC GROW licensed. All techs must be OEM certified to be able to install the various different original equipment manufacturers. And we also have to have skill sets like capable of installing fiber optics for fiber DAS, connectors, couplers, a lot of conduit, electrical circuits, and antennas. In this jurisdiction, we use a lot of what's called half-inch coax to connect the antennas to the BDA themselves, and for the donor runs up to the donor antenna. In this jurisdiction, every inch of half-inch coax has to be installed in conduit. So a specialty contractor must be able to work with conduit because all the horizontal and distribution antennas need to be fed by that half-inch coax, and they need to be provided mechanical coverage for those particular half-inch coax runs, which is conduit, EMT. So in pausing and understanding what this is, I think the first thing that property owners need to do to determine where they are in the compliance process for these mandates is a signal survey. And the signal survey is a benchmarking of sorts. So we come in with sophisticated test gear. This is a picture of ours. We happen to use the PC-Tel Ivy Flex scanner, which is a very expensive piece of equipment that allows us to go into a building and put a grid over your floor plan and test each individual grid and determine what kind of signal we're getting from the downlink from the macro. It's very accurate and it's very precise, and it's geared for this function only. There are other types of test equipment and Ritsus that you can come in and test specific cells, but a lot of the function is manual, where this is all automatic. And we load the frequencies in, we turn the system on, we get on a floor, we test the entire floor and each cell, we take the readings. We also go into the elevators and close the doors and take a test on every single floor in every elevator, because those are critical, as well as the stairwells. So if you look at this next slide, you will see quite a few different tests. So the green areas represent passing. So on this particular floor of this building, everything passed, but you see these little red triangles and these green triangles? Well, those are your sensitive areas. Over here, we have a stairwell. It passed, but we've got elevators right here, and each one of these elevators failed to have produce a signal that was neg 95 or better. Each one of these cells are the common areas of the floors, and you can see signals of neg 83, neg 80, neg 90. These are all passing scores. But our critical areas in the elevators in the core of the building, mind you, are generally failure because they're in the center of the building. They're usually surrounded by concrete. Then you have a steel cage moving up and down with steel doors. So historically, I find that this is kind of a typical signal survey if they're situated close to a macro, that the core of the building needs coverage. And down here is the reference for that visual we just saw, and shows what the levels are. And in the critical areas, you can see signals of 111, 106, 108. Those are not passing scores. So when we talk about signal surveys, it is the most important part because of determining where you are in the compliance process, because it gives you a roadmap of where you have dead spots and where you have good coverage. And I have to commend the fire department and the architects of their laws and rules here, because they were very succinct in developing a plan that only provides coverage in the areas that are required, because it's a very complicated process from an RF design. It's unlike cellular, where we want a big bloom over the entire building and actually going outside so you maintain coverage to your cell phone. We need to keep the signal indoors. As a matter of fact, if our donor antenna hears any of our distribution antennas, it can put the whole city system into oscillation and render it useless. And it's happened in this jurisdiction before. So it's up to contractors and designers and engineers like ours that design these buildings to only put antennas where they're required. And this is the first jurisdiction that I participated in. I've worked in 34 jurisdictions that they actually come out and take a proactive stance and do uplink testing to confirm your results of the signal survey and say, yes, we want antennas here, but we don't want them there. Additionally, it's one of the first jurisdictions that has actually placed antennas and required us to place antennas in the elevator hoistways. This is brilliant because you have basically a moving Faraday cage in an elevator, which blocks transmission, and we need to get those antennas as close as we can to propagate through that steel car that's moving up and down these hoistway shafts. So I know Richard Rodriguez was very proactive in getting these elevator variances and requiring elevator hoistway antennas. And this is brilliant because when you think about a building, its core are the elevators generally, and it's surrounded by concrete and metal. So kudos to those who are involved in getting this type of application of our systems into that core to cover those elevators. And a lot of time the stairwells are adjacent, and these antennas in the hoistway help cover those as well. So that's such an important step as the signal survey, and the radio shop will actually come out with the survey after we submit it to them, and they'll confirm everything. They'll test their radios in the elevators. They'll test their radios in the stairwells. They'll get uplink and downlink readings and confirm the results of our benchmarking. And from there, we take that combined effort to determine how to design this, keeping our signal inside the confines of the building, because the worst thing that can happen is that we leak outside the building and we cause interference, and the firefighters and the first responders cannot use their radios because of oscillation. Then we move on to the design and engineering phase. And as you can see in this illustration, there are Yagi antennas in the hoistways, and BDAs have to be placed in the fire command center if possible. If there's no room, have to be in a 2-hour rated structure. Additionally, we need to have 2-hour rated risers to the donor antenna. So there's a lot of rules that go into designing this and getting through the process of plan check. Again, very comprehensive process here. The permit and plan check is very comprehensive and takes time. We try to anticipate this, but there's usually several rounds of changes and corrections that we need to do to make sure we're compliant with all the local and national codes. So it starts with the grid test, then we get the radio shop visit, then we move to our notes to the design team, and they get a copy of the grid test. And we do the design and engineering, and we render a full stamp set, stamped by an engineer, which is required in this jurisdiction. And we submit it to the radio shop, and they sign off first because they have the notes of where the antennas need to be placed. And once we get their sign off, we submit to the formal plan check, electrical and fire. Again, this is a comprehensive process. Timeline, this could take anywhere from a month to 3 months. I don't know, Richard, if you're on the webinar, but I suspect that plan check is probably going to get bogged down here with all the new submissions, with everybody trying to get compliance. So I don't know if I'm accurate at this point, but let's say it's anywhere between a month and 4 months for good measure. we get our corrections, we make them, we submit them, and then we get approvals from electrical, sign off, and fire. And then we establish our notice of commencement. And Robert talked about this, the looming deadline to get into plan check is January 1, 2024. So it takes a bit of time to get there with the grid tests and the radio shop visits and the radio shop sign off and everything we need to do to get your building prepped for that submittal. And of course, the design and engineering. So we're running out of time to get compliant. So I just wanted to note that the sooner that you can get this process started, the better chances of getting compliant by year end. That's an important deadline that's looming. And then we get into the integration phase. We have to order materials and equipment. We've had some constraints getting cable over the past year due to the supply chain logistics and the constriction of supply from China. That's gotten better, but that's a factor. Then we have a construction start. We do our scanning and coring. Sometimes we have to core up through stairwells and into elevator hoistways. Then we install the conduit in the elevators, in the stairwells, in the garage and other common areas. And I might make a note here that it requires the participation of your elevator companies, which are usually either Otis or Schindler or Tyson or Coney, because we have to ride on top of their elevators and they have to operate the cars for us to get our infrastructure in place in those hoistways. So this is expensive, mind you, because they usually charge between $300 and $500 an hour, and it takes quite a few hours to get these infrastructures in place. And then once we get our conduit done, we install our cable, our fiber, our connectors, our couplers, our antennas and grounders and active and passive infrastructure, the BDAs, the remotes, the annunciator panels. And then we have to take this system and bring it online and
Interesting. I'm not sure what happened to Will. He was on a roll, and may I add, he had so much good content. So hopefully he's able to log in again. But man, there was so much good content that he was able to produce to us. We're gonna go ahead and wait a few minutes, but before that, we have some questions that we can dive into a little bit, Robert.
Yeah, I've noticed, you know, we have a question about that since this is a request from the city, whether there would be any cost to whether there would be any like tax credits for the financing or funding of this project. I mean, frankly, this is not necessarily a request from the city. I mean, it kind of is, but it started at the state level, at the legislative level, and then of course the local authority having jurisdiction in this case, City of Miami, and we have Chief Diaz on the line to chime in if he feels he'd like to. We are not aware, I am not aware of any tax credits or other governmental subsidy, etc., for to offset the costs associated with this project. And there's another question I've noticed, which is we have 6 months to get this done. Why are we being given such short notice? You know, the fact of the matter is that the legislature adopted these statutes a few years ago, and the deadline was specified in the statute. I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, I think the legislature has even extended the deadline. But in either event, I want to be clear on the deadlines. To the extent that your building needs to install an enhanced system to allow for the proper two-way communication, you need to submit the permit for that by January 1st, 2024. It's not that you need to have the work done by then. You need to have the permit for the system filed by that or the application for the permit filed by that date, January 1st, 2024. So yeah, you've got roughly 6 months within which to hire a vendor such as Will to come and evaluate your building, perform their test, and then to the extent that you need to install the system, then they would of course have to explain to you what system is required and what costs are you looking at. And then they would presumably, or your contractor or your vendor would presumably file for the permit to the authority having jurisdiction. And then you would have until January 1st of 2025 to get that system installed. So I wanted to be clear on those timeframes. I'm looking at another question here, and their equipment advised that they only fail the elevator shafts or survey results stated some hallways. I mean, the question says the city came to our building and tested their equipment and advised that we only failed the elevator shafts. Our survey results stated some hallways didn't pass, but the city advised those areas would not be an issue, only the shafts. The department is not providing those readings for our records. The building wants to assure we have written proof of what is acceptable by the department, so our quotes and price are specific to the work required. When we apply for a permit and hopefully pass, would that be our confirmation, or in the future are we still open to having to add equipment if the city inspector demands it later? First of all, I don't know I can't speak to what the city may or may not have done, so we will just assume for the sake of argument that they have. But unless you're getting something in writing saying that you do or don't have to do something, I would encourage associations or building owners to seek the involvement of a professional such as Will to do their inspections of the property. And to give you a written report of what is required, and of course to go through all of the steps that he described. I see that Chief Diaz has his hand up, so I guess Chief Diaz, if you can unmute, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So I think that was an excellent question, and I think you answered it just extremely well. Obviously, that information that you've already received and obtained and you have record of needs to be presented to us and spoken with us. One of the things that we do to try to facilitate, whether it's a BDA permit or any other permit, and there's any doubt or confusion or any record that you feel is prudent that needs to be introduced, every time that's brought forth, I recommend always that a meeting be scheduled with our office in the fire prevention, whether our team of engineers or myself, to review what it is, to better guide you, so that when you go to submit for your process or your permit number, you can now move through in a quicker way and not have delays going back and forth. So a preliminary type meeting a lot of times goes a long way, and we're open to do them at any time it is requested.
Yeah. Mr. Diaz, does the city have like a preferred vendor, or is there a vendor list? Somebody is asking that in the chat.
So we deal and work with all types of vendors and all engineers. Obviously, there's requirements, as Robert and Will both were alluding to earlier, that there's certain levels for certification and training and education and licensing that's required in order for them to be able to perform or even pull these permits, which is double checked by the building department whenever they go to pull a permit. So outside of that, we don't have a preference. We are open and work with all sorts of vendors and engineers all the time. So as long as they're qualified, that's our biggest concern.
Excellent.
Robert, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
There is a false understanding here that within the milestone inspections, there are different recertifications periods. This DBA is included in those inspections. I don't think it is included. It's something on top and above of what is already prescribed by the state.
Yes, there are some components of a milestone inspection report that pertain to life safety systems, but it is not my understanding that the scope of a milestone inspection report is to comment upon the bi-directional amplification needs within a building. So I would have that conversation with the entities that are performing the milestone inspections for the buildings, and confirm with them whether this is a service they provide, and A, and B, whether they're qualified to provide this service, as we've discussed previously. Moreover, it is possible that your building may not be due for a milestone inspection yet. And so, but you may need to act quickly in order to comply with the requirements of the fire prevention code as it pertains to the inspection of your property for the need, as to whether or not the need arises to install the BDA system. And so I don't know if many of us may have the luxury of waiting for the performance of the milestone inspection anyway. I've been, recommending to our clients to act proactively with regard to this inspection that needs to be performed for the bi-directional amplification systems. I've been advising my clients to act proactively with regard to the structural integrity reserve studies that need to be performed, as well as the milestone inspections, because you're going to be dealing with a big need for these things. We see you, Will. I'm just going to wrap up my thoughts. We are going to, we have to be dealing with a large need in a large, densely populated community, which is, South Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward counties, and the professionals, and especially the qualified professionals in the marketplace to provide these services might be limited. And so acting sooner rather than later, I think, is advisable. Moreover, a lot of our clients are dealing with exponentially increasing budgetary expenses. The insurance industry is, some have characterized it as being in a state of crisis. The premiums being quoted to many of our clients are astronomical, assuming you can even get insurance coverage. And so budgets for condominium buildings, many condominium buildings are really being strained. And then, one of the questions that I'm probably going to leave Will with, leading into Will, assuming, Will, you can hear me loud and clear? Thumbs up.
I can. Sorry
Great.
about the technical difficulty.
No problem.
I got knocked off.
One of the issues that many of my clients have asked, and I don't know if there's an answer, is, what is this going to cost us? And I'm assuming it varies, because it might depend on A, whether you need to have the improvements installed, and B, what is the extent of the BDA system that needs to be installed within your building. But I'm curious, and many of my clients have been curious about what numbers we're talking about and what should we be ready to spend in the worst case scenario, because we've got all these other expenses that we got to contend with.
Last time, Robert, that I did some search on it on our own from BHA perspective, we were talking about fixing the antennas, resection between $100,000 to $500,000.
Yeah.
That was back in March.
Yeah.
Now you can imagine. I just leave it like that to you. We continue saying that, not to be negative, but we are very close to have a condos crisis.
Yeah,
It's around the corner. So I just leave it like that.
agreed. And I know you're contending with higher insurance rates and all kinds of other 25-year and things like that. That it depends on each building as far as cost goes. I think that here I can share my screen hopefully again. And the turnkey system cost is about 35 cents per square foot to 75 cents per square foot. The factors are, of course, the building, its building density and the architecture, where it is located, distance to the macro tower and shadows from other buildings. Jurisdiction, if you're in the county, you have to put in 2 separate systems to cover the 450 megahertz and the 800 megahertz. Fortunately, the city of Miami is just one frequency that you have to cover in the 800 megahertz, and how much your building has an existing coverage. So you're absolutely right, Ernesto. It's anywhere, depending on the size of your building, from 100,000 to $500,000 for most structures, but I've seen it go as high as $1 million for 2.3 million square foot properties. So it is very specific to your property, and it's also very specific to the signal survey results and how much organic coverage that exists. Another thing that that a lot of folks are talking about, and we responded by bringing another model, is typically on a CapEx build, the customer owns and funds it. We design it, engineer, build, and commission the system, and other vendors like ourselves. And then we have to perform maintenance and monitoring because it's required by the city to get the certification that we have a long-term maintenance agreement in place where we test these systems annually, and we come in to determine if things are working as they should. And then that particular event could trigger a technology refresh, or if the city rebanded their frequencies or changed frequencies, we would have to accommodate them and upgrade our systems to handle those changes. So we came out with a service where, for a subscription fee, we install and operate these systems. We own them. We execute the design, build, and integration. We pay for those costs, and we perform the maintenance and monitoring and the technology refresh over a period of 10 years, kind of like you would get for your cable, where we charge a per door fee. And that helps soften the blow a little bit and shift the expense to the operating budgets. But there's a lot of folks that saying, hey, we don't have the money to build these systems, and I know we need it. It will require special assessments and board meetings and so forth. So this is a cogent discussion, and we responded by offering to build them ourselves and maintain and monitor them. So that's an option as well. And again, I apologize for dropping here. My internet went out and I came back on. I couldn't get back on the system. So thanks for filling in the voids.
You need an amplification system for your internet there.
You know, oddly enough, I have one at my house. I have a cellular system in the house. So if I was there, it wouldn't have been a problem.
Someone is asking, what is the cost for OpEx?
So it depends on how expensive the system is built. If it's a 2 million square foot building and it costs us $900,000 to build the system, it's going to be a higher payment. But for an average building, the monthly cost could be anywhere from $2,000, depending on the size, to $6,000 or $7,000 a month. But remember, that includes the maintenance and monitoring. It also includes the technology refreshes. So if we had to add a system, or if somebody built a building next year and we needed to add antennas and so forth, those are borne by us. So it's pretty much, again, it's a tailored thing based on each building and how big it is and how much it costs to put the system in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a question for Mr. Blanch. In case that condo associations face resistance or pushback from residents or other stakeholders regarding the installation of BDA radios, how can legal counsel help navigate and address these concerns effectively?
I mean, well, the spending money is not something anybody ever wants to do. And we've already rattled through the laundry list of possible anticipated and additional expenses that our community association clients are going to have to likely be dealing with in the next years to come. So the bottom line is that this is a life safety requirement. It's a state statutorily mandated requirement and also required at the local levels. This is like the structural integrity reserve study. This is just like the milestone inspections. All of those things are life safety geared requirements. This one in particular was not a result of the Champlain catastrophe, but as the chief mentioned earlier, you know, when first responders are called to your building, you know, in order for them to do their job safely and to do their job properly, there needs to be a way for them to communicate. And so, you know, there really shouldn't be a price on safety. There shouldn't be a price on human lives, whether you are the saver or the savee. And so, you know, as legal counsel, I consider my job to be precisely that, you know, to counsel our clients on the need for compliance with these systems, you know, these requirements, on the need to be prepared for these requirements. You know, you're not going to avoid this. The legislature is not going to kick the can down the road. There's not going to be a legislative bill adopted between now and the end of the year eliminating the need for this. You know, it sounds insensitive maybe, but we've got to bite the bullet and just do it and recognize that we're going to have to spend the money and do it. We need to plan for it. We should budget for it. The sooner we reach out to the Will Washburns of the world and understand where our building lies with the need for these improvements, with the need for these systems and what the cost might be, the sooner we're going to be in a position to plan and budget and be ready for this. The sooner we'll be able to reach out to lenders and see if we can finance this. You know, the sooner we'll be able to adopt special assessments at our properties and instead of making it a one lump sum special assessment due next week, you know, it could be a 2-year special assessment or maybe a more prolonged special assessment should if it's even an option in your building. So it's more about planning. It's more about being ready. You know, this is the reality. This is a certainty, you know, that we need to be ready for. And so as the attorneys, I think that's how we can assist. We can assist our clients with, you know, guiding them with what the law requires, maybe putting them in touch with the authorities having jurisdiction so that they could speak with the representatives over there and get a full understanding of what the code requires. You know, putting them in touch with people like Will so that, you know, they can be ready and be in the hands of qualified professionals that can, you know, perform these inspections and prepare the proper designs. You know, if they need to borrow money, you know, finding lenders that are familiar with community associations, so that the process is streamlined, so that the requirements and the conditions on financing that might be available are not onerous on the community associations. You know, if we need to adopt special assessments, how do we structure that? What is the best way of structuring it in a building? Because some people in your building might be able to pay their share in a lump sum. Others might not. Others might need a prolonged payment period. And so maybe we can rely on those people that can pay lump sum to pay for the initial cash flow needs of these projects and these improvements, and then rely on those other people on the payment plans to pay for the later end of the stream of these improvements. So you know, I think legal counsel and management can assist in those in those efforts, as I've described.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And you're right. This is a matter of safety, so it shouldn't be something that anybody skimps on.
And
Well,
another option, if I make a parenthesis here, it might sound a little bit tough on an auction. If you are not willing to pay, because you will have to pay as an owner of a condo, have an open mind to sell, because this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And we have been saying this for months. This is not a joke. Condo crisis is around the corner. You write this down. It is around the corner. We have more here in South Florida, more than 800 properties that they are in need of repairs, and associations are not being proactive. And property management companies, they can do so much, but it's up to the boards to make those decisions and rely on the expertise of your legal counsels, as Robert is saying. So this is not negative news, but I'm telling you, be prepared. If you don't want to pay for what you have to pay now in order to improve your properties, open your minds and start selling, because it's coming.
Yeah, and that's a cogent discussion. And back to the fact that, you know, you cited that there are 800 properties in the South Florida area. There's not enough of us to build them by 2025. You know, historically, we could build 20 or 30 of these a year. And there's a handful of other contractors that are qualified and good contractors in the area. But all banded together, we can't build 800 properties by the 25 deadline. So that's a cogent discussion. If you do have the money, get into plan check now, or start the process, because it's a year and a half left to build all these properties, and we physically can't do it with the limited resources and the specialty contractors in the area.
well, and that's a good question. That's a good, you know, one of the questions that came in when you were gone is, how long has Digitech Wireless have been around? Because there's other new companies popping up, and so some of the audience didn't know exactly the credibility of some of these companies. So I think you guys have been around for quite some time, right?
Yeah, we've been around since 2011. We're a national builder. We have strong presence on the East and the West Coast. Miami is where we're going to be pumping all of our resources for growth. We're going to scale up to be able to build 50 to 60 properties a year. But that still isn't enough. You know, there's some other great builders in the marketplace. But even if all three of us or four of us banded together, now there's a lot of new entrants. Fire life safety companies who usually specialize in fire life safety, and electrical contractors and cellular. But there's a process in this jurisdiction. It took us 2 years to really learn what's required to be compliant in this jurisdiction. So I can't speak to who all these new entrants are, but it should be a prerequisite that you have built something in this jurisdiction, because there's a lot of people that just don't understand. This is a tough jurisdiction, and you really need to understand it to build.
Yeah, we're going to go to Jasmine, and I know we're going a little bit over, but I feel like this is a very important topic that we don't want to rush off of. I do want to respect everybody's time, but there's a few more points we would like to make before we end this webinar. What are the penalties if you do not comply by January 1st, 2025? Is anybody aware of that?
We don't know. We don't know, and maybe Chief Diaz or Richard Rodriguez or somebody from the department can opine on that, but we're not sure. It's up to the authority having jurisdiction. I think that if you show constructive progress and get your permits and show that you're trying to get these built, it should be adequate to disseminate, and get us into the planning and construction phase, but nobody's sure from our end. Robert, do you have any intel on that?
In none of the statutes that I've read, have I seen anything about a penalty or a consequence in the event that you don't comply in time. So I don't know.
May I ask you, yeah, one observation. I think that there is a penalty by January 1st, 2024, if the survey is not done. I think there is a penalty. I think there is a 500 penalty per day to the associations, at least in the city of Miami, okay, to my knowledge. If this survey that we're talking about, not the plan to in order to revamp your antenna resection, if it fails the survey, but to my knowledge, through the search that we have done, if within the city of Miami you have not done the survey by December 31st of 2023, as of January 2024, you will be penalized $500 per day.
I'll defer to the city of Miami folks on that. I'm not aware.
I apologize. I'm not 100% certain, and I will follow up with Abby and Robert if you want with yourself after this. I'll get you guys a more definitive answer and get verification after I speak with our legal team as well, just to confirm if there's anything that's been either put in place or codified already as to what the expectation would be if it were not to be compliant.
Okay.
Yeah,
and we'll follow up with everybody.
I'd appreciate that. That's great, Chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We're gonna let Jasmine ask to unmute, so you could go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, how are you? I just have a question. I'm confused about the deadline. Is for January 2024 or 25?
The deadline to have the property inspected and the permits submitted for the system, assuming you need the system, is January 1st, 2024. If you need to install the system, then you have to apply for the permit by January 1st, 2024, and you need to complete the system installation by January 1st, 2025.
That's correct.
That makes
Thank you so much. The system installation in January 25, huh?
Exactly. You requested January 24, and by January, needs to be
Perfect.
completed. But
Yeah, the survey must be completed. The survey must completed. The inspection must completed by December 31st, 2023. Meaning that this January 1st, 2024, you are not in compliance.
that was the survey. That's the survey. It's not the system.
That's the survey inspection. That is correct.
Yeah, so 1575 is going to go in effect here on July 1st, and they augmented the rules that mostly impacted new construction. It said that if you had your survey after your property was built, they couldn't withhold TCO, but you had to have the survey done and you had 1 year to mitigate the property after the survey is done. It also, it says, so that would also apply probably to existing structures. However, I think the biggest part of the rule is the legislation, the prior legislation required to have the permitting and plan check application in before January 1, 2024. So I think that's an important benchmark we got to talk about as well.
okay. Well, we're going to be wrapping up here. I have one more question. This is for the city of Miami. Is the city of Miami going to adopt NFPA 1225 version of the code for installation of BDA? Mr. Diaz?
No entendí la pregunta. Eso ya está muy técnico.
Okay, so Abby, it's a great question. One of the things that we do is we work hand in hand, just how Will was mentioning before with our radio shop. And part of us being the authority, it's part of their authority as well. So we do adopt most NFPAs. What we're currently working on from the fire department side is we're going to have posted on our website all the parameters and requirements for the BDAs, given that there's so many inquiries and so much information that's being requested, and obviously changes that have been taking place over the course of the last couple of years, and more so in the last few months. So we're actually in the process of working with our radio shop to adjust our requirements and all of theirs, and in there would be all the NFPAs and everything would be required. So that is another piece of information I could share with you that you guys can post on your website, and have it as available links that people can get to and refer to at any point, and then we'll have all those answers there for you.
Yeah, that would be extremely helpful. Thank you, Chief. Now, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If there's any pending questions, we'll be sure to follow up. But Mr. Diaz, Mr. Blanch, Mr. Washburn, do you have any final or closing remarks before we end today's meeting?
I do. The signal survey is the most important place to start. We've been able to get properties passed out at Miami Beach that didn't need to remediate this. So I think it's very important to get your survey done and find out where you're at in the coverage spectrum, and do it soon, because time is running out to get into plan check if you do need to remediate it. So, you know, there may be a chance that your property has all the coverage it needs.
Mhm. And where can we find you, Mr. Washburn?
We're located at 201 South Biscayne. I will publish to all the attendees our contact information so that they can reach out if they need a benchmarking or a signal survey or even consulting at this process.
Thank you, Mr. Washburn. Mr. Blanch?
Yeah, I want to thank you guys again at the BHA, Abby and Ernesto, for the opportunity to present to the attendees. I also want to thank the attendees for very good questions, very insightful questions, and to Will and Chief Diaz for collaborating on this as well. You know, I will reiterate that, you know, it may not seem like a lot of time, but, you know, it is what it is. We've got to act promptly. Your boards need to mobilize quickly to engage the professionals to do the evaluations and assessments of your property, and to do the work and budget accordingly, and make sure you're working with qualified and experienced you know, consultants, with attorneys, with accountants, with management, engineers, contractors that are qualified, so that you're not led astray in these requirements. And I think it's very important as board members, particularly, to recognize, because it happens all too often with us as attorneys, that, you know, you need to heed the counsel and the advice that is the correct counsel and advice. Don't shop for what you want to hear, shop for the right answer. And I think that that's a key thing that we shouldn't lose sight of in what our obligations as board members and managers to community associations might be. So once again, everybody, thank you for your time and for the privilege of being able to speak to you all.
That's right. Don't shop for what you want to hear, but shop for the right answer. That's right. Thank you, Mr. Blanch. Mr. Diaz, do you have anything you would like to share?
Yes, Abby, thank you. I want to echo exactly what Will and Robert were just mentioning. You know, I appreciate the opportunity from the association and from all the members that are on the call to be able to come and speak with everyone and direct any questions. You know, I get it. There's a state statute and we're obligated to enforce and to abide by it. So just want to remind you, and we've been doing it with several different condominiums right now. And I've taken place in a lot of the meetings with them, whether it's through an ELSS and a review of it, which includes a BDA, because they're trying to bring their whole building up to par and up to code. So, we're available. Any questions or concerns from your professionals or whatever vendors you may hire that you want to reassure yourselves or get a better understanding, just reach out to us directly. We'll schedule a meeting. We'll go over all the details and whatever questions you may have, and then trying to help guide you throughout the process a little bit better. So we're there, we're available. Everybody knows we're on the MRC at the 10th floor. You're welcome to walk in, or just go ahead and reach out via email to us, and we'll go ahead and coordinate whatever meetings you guys need. We're here to assist. So thank you all for your time, and I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Diaz. I do realize that this is summer and a lot of people are out on vacation, but given the deadline, if your association would like to host this in person, we would be more than happy to have this webinar in person that you can bring some of your board members and be able to explain to them. If that's something that you desire, please let us know and we can coordinate something. Usually July, a lot of people are in town, so we can mobilize rather quickly, but we'd like to take direction from you and to hear if you're willing and available to meet sooner than later to discuss such an important topic. Ernesto, would you like to say anything as we close?
No, thank you so much to the panelists and for their advices and their experience and expertise, and to the listeners and the people, the participants, to please follow what is being said, because it's going to impact everyone. Yeah. And the sooner that we act, the better. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, and continue be active, and thank you for your membership and your activism. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Will, and thank you, Mr. Diaz.
That's right. Thank you all for joining today. We really appreciate your time, and we'll be sure to follow up with you via email. And again, if you would like to see this webinar in person, let us know and we'd be happy to schedule something for in person. Thank you, Mr. Diaz. Thank you, Mr. Blanch. Thank you, Mr. Washburn, Ernesto, and everybody. We hope you have a beautiful rest of the day. Enjoy the long weekend.
Thank you, Abby, for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your weekend and happy 4th.
Likewise. Thank you.